Hi, welcome to Paul's Little Room. Today I'm going to be comparing three headphones by the company Grado, and they are from very different price points. The budget end, the premium end, and the mid-tier. The budget headphones I will be discussing are the SR80s. The mid-tier headphones I'm going to be discussing are the SR325s. Notice this is gold, but most people will be familiar with this silver. And the GS1000. So there you go. The SR80s and the SR325s are in the same range. Apart from the materials, the design is very similar. Both headphones are not known for a strong sub bass and have a pronounced roll off, so they don't have a lot of rumble there, but you can increase that with a pad change. But before I talk about that, let's just very quickly talk about the premium headphones, and those are the GS1000. Now, as you can see, these are made with a mahogany body, and in fact that mahogany is throughout. If I take this pad off, you'll notice it's a 100% mahogany body and cup. You'll see the driver has been glued in there. The band, you can see the yoke is actually a aluminium yoke, though this is anodized in black. So it's got a quality feel to it, but unfortunately it does have some drawbacks that are familiar issues with most Grados, in that there's some finishing issues. So you'll notice that these have been quite thinly varnished on the front, and then there's no varnish underneath. This feels like almost it's been freshly turned. Additionally, they share this rather cheap plastic moulded adjustment mechanism here. It just has some rubber bungs inside which grip onto this metal rod. This was the very first iteration of the GS1000. It has a square rod. If you can see that, I'll show you that, which I think is actually really nice. And an advantage this has on the more recent round rods is that it, even though it swivels as far as you want it to, it's quite accurate. It doesn't give you unnecessary swivel when you don't want it. Now, I think with the version I, they improved. I think the voice coil was slightly thicker. On the magnet, the driver was slightly widened, so this is actually the same width driver as on the SR325. The cable was thickened. You'll notice this is actually quite manageable for Grado. It's actually quite manageable. It's quite thick, but it's manageable for Grado. The version I, there were a lot of complaints because it was even thicker. It was a hefty beast of a cable. And then the version X, I think, shares the same thickness as that, but within a cloth sheath. There's this very nice real leather on here. It doesn't have any padding at all, so none at all, but these are tremendously light, and I think for that premium feel, if you want a headphone to be special, you want it to be comfortable. Now, if these were heavy, then I would be getting a very concentrated weight on top of my head here, and these are weightless. These are tremendously light, and in fact these are lighter than the SR325s with their solid aluminium body here, or their solid aluminium cup. Incidentally, the SR325s share the identical plastic housing to the driver as the cheaper models. There's also the SR 60s below these. According to the manufacturers, there are improvements with the driver performance, but unless you have baby's ears, you're not going to hear it. Even though I have the SR80s, I'd be interested in trying them out and comparing them because they offer a better price to performance, apparently. So back to the GS1000s. If you have any version of the GS1000, you're going to have certain traits which will carry it above the SR range. One of those is soundstage. If you look at the frequency graph, there's a very smooth dip in the sub bass. There's a little bit of a bump in the mid bass, which is what you want. It gives these quite a warm and a textured bass. But also the mids and therefore some of the vocals are slightly recessed. And I say slightly, I would compare it to the Hi-Fi Man Aria Stealth in its tuning, which I think is a very nicely tuned headphone. The Aria Stealths by Hi-Fi Man, they have more of a noticeable bass rumble, a sub-bass rumble, compared to these. But in fact, I don't think these are wanting for bass. If you have a particularly bassy piece of music, these will show that through. That will come through. Likewise, I would describe these as slightly flatter than the tuning of the SR range, and the headphones in the SR range I describe as more coloured sound. A good example of that, the SR60s and 80s, using this pad, and this is the S cushion. These actually offer a little bit of a fun bass bump in the mid bass, but they've got virtually no sub bass. However, the upper range, so from between about 3 and 10 hertz, you have a few bumps and peaks there which make these a bit spicy up above, with drum hits, S's and T's in vocals, vocalists who have a particularly high up and peaky range. These might be a little bit strong, and in fact the SR325s, they heighten that even more, but I don't have an issue with that. I feel that these don't have the detail, these don't have the variation of tone in the treble that the SR325s have. And if you look at a frequency graph, you'll notice that the peaks are at a similar level, but I think what you're having is a slightly warmer mid bass with these, so the treble impact, the sharpness of that treble isn't as noticeable. With these and the SR325s, you can tune them just by changing the pads. I think they come originally with the F pads. Now they are very forwards vocally sounding headphone, and in fact they are more forward sounding than the SR80s and the SR60s. In my opinion, these are absolutely fantastic for rock music. They've got a very accurate, well textured mid bass. They've got a little bit of that very accurate sub bass. They don't have a lot of power to that sub bass, but you can, as I say, tune it with the pads. These pads offer more of a sound stage. They've got more airiness. They give you a little bit more sounds going out that way, a little bit more width and a slightly more depth. Now, because of the way these headphones are actually tuned to the drivers, you're not going to be able to take away the forward nature of the vocals, but you are going to be able to bring some of the other sounds forwards in the mix on that periphery. So for instance, you can up the sub bass. So going on again to the GS1000, these are meant for much more of a I would say a professional sound. The frequency is flatter, it's less coloured, the texture to the sounds is really beautiful, but you're not going to have a high emphasis on the mid bass. It's slightly emphasized, but not anything like as much as on these, which are designed more for your average listener, not as discerning. The vocals on these, instead of being forward, are just very slightly dipped. And then the treble, you have round about that 10 hertz area. It's just brought down slightly, and it's a bit closer to the 3 hertz. And what that means is you're going to get lots of texture and detail in the treble, but without a sudden jump when you get that sibilant part of the track. So for instance, cymbal strikes, vocals which are with a lot of s and t sounds, these are going to be easier to listen to for people who are susceptible to that than the SR325s. Now, one thing I would definitely note is these are mine, and the reason I'm keeping both is because the SR325s, they are almost perfect for classic rock for me. They have everything you want detail-wise in the textures of the instruments, the vocals, it brings it forwards, it has an intimate sound. The sound stage is intimate. It's not narrow like let's say a Sennheiser HD 600, but it's narrower than this. The vocals in classic rock music, for instance, let's say I don't know, the Beatles, Nirvana, but there you go, 325s, absolutely beautiful for rock. Now, these are better for classical music. These have better separation between the instruments. They've got more staging, they've got more sound out this way. Now, if you were to pad swap with these headphones, one misnomer is that people say, oh, all Grados sound the same, you can just change the pads. Well, it's not true. It just isn't true. Now, this version of the GS1000 has the same width to a driver as the 325, but they sound completely different. There's a silkiness to the instrumentals. There's a gentleness to the sound with these. It's almost a romantic sound. You don't have the as much punch and energy, forceful punch and energy as with the SR80s or the 325s. But what you do have is detail is all there across the board. And in fact, I compare these quite favourably with the Hi-Fi Man arias. These don't have they're just very slightly less wide this way than the arias, but it's very, very close. The depth, obviously, the aria has a massive head pad, a massive driver. These don't have large drivers, but they still have a good staging. And the instrumental separation, if you have vocalists, several vocalists in your mix, their vocals will be separated incredibly well with these. The SR range, they have good separation if you're listening to a classic mix of one vocalist, drum, bass guitar, lead guitar. Then there's a distinctive gap between those. But as soon as the mix gets a bit complicated, as soon as you get busy with lots of different sounds, lots of different instruments, lots of vocalists, then unfortunately the entire SR range, they will get a little bit confused, and you'll get a melding together of those sounds. Tonally, they're beautiful. You know, that you'll get some of the most realistic sounding instrumentals with these, but you also get realism with these. But you get that separation, you get that visualization of the space. I would say that they're wide round there, and then you've got a slightly more intimate front, so it's almost like an oval, but it's a very smooth oval soundstage. As soon as you go to the 325s, it's very much the opposite. You've got a very pointed out, defined left and right, and then you've got a very forward vocal, but then you have a dip in between, so it's almost like it's a W shape. It's a bit of a wavy. It's not a very accurate sounding environment compared to the GS1000. If you have a very simple mix again, so let's say if you're listening to Nirvana, you're listening to the Beatles. I know they're very different, but you know what I mean. It's a small room sound. Then that difference is going to the variations in the sound, in the staging. It's not going to be an issue at all, and in fact you will feel like you're in a little concert in a small venue with these. To a lesser extent you have that with the SR80s. With the SR80s, I would say these are more of a popular tuning, but it's a little bit woolly, doesn't have the accuracy of the SR325s. And I think one factor which is to do with that is this metal housing. These are going to be stopping that the unwanted resonances in the body of the headphone, which the SR80s and SR60s will have. As far as a wood tone is concerned, I do believe that there is, to a certain extent, a tonal value to the materials that you choose to make headphones out of, and no better example than with wood versus metal. When the sound waves are going to be coming off of the driver and they're going to be hitting different materials on their way to your ear, certain materials will absorb those frequencies, and you're going to have two things. You're going to have a resonance of that material, which will affect the bass, mostly the bass, and the tightness of the treble. Whilst I was listening to these, unfortunately this week, the sound started to cut out on one side. Knowing that these are almost vintage headphones, not quite vintage headphones. These are from 2016. They're not very old, but having cables which are non-detachable has meant that there is wear and tear. And you can see there's a twisting here, and one inherent issue with most Grados is that ability to twist, and eventually you will get a failure. Taking apart the SR325s, which I have done in the past, and taking apart the SR80s, the only thing holding in the cable in here, apart from the solder to the driver, is a zip tie, which is a particularly poor way to stop a cable coming out. There's no thought gone into adding a permanent structural addition to the cup to hold that cable in place. So I'm going to be doing a cable mod, and guess what? I'm going to be getting a Custom Cans UK wireless cable mod, which I've done with my SR325s. And I'm also going to be, I'm very pleased to report, going to Custom Cans to have the cabling done on my 3D printed headphone project. So would you pay £1,000 for a headphone? Would you pay £1,000 for a headphone which is put together quite flimsily, which has some materials which are quite cheap to the touch. But would you pay £1,000 for a headphone which sounds exquisite? That is the question I'm asking you. I'm perfectly happy to recommend the GS1000s. When you compare them to headphones very specifically like the Hi-Fi Man Aria Stealth, they are surprisingly comparable. They're very similar in some ways. They've got a similar sound stage. As I mentioned before, the depth changes this way, similar that way, but also the imaging, the level of imaging, the separation between the instruments, the realism of those instruments is exquisite for the Aria Stealth and the GS1000s. People argue that the Hi-Fi Man range of headphones feel a bit flimsy and a bit cheaply put together, so you get the similar issues. So what it boils down to sometimes is whether you like the look of these, whether you think they fit your lifestyle. Are they comfortable? Do you enjoy the listening experience? Are you thinking, oh my goodness, I've had a hard day, I really want to pick up those headphones and just get carried away by the music? And both of those headphones, I would say, a resounding yes. Yes, they have issues, and there are less physical issues with the Hi-Fi Man headphones. I do believe in the future Grado will get their act together eventually. They're undeniably popular as a brand. They're not as well known or popular than Hi-Fi Man, but then again they haven't flooded the market, they haven't put as many products on the market, and they don't sell as aggressively as Hi-Fi Man. Now the SR325s, they are always recommended in hi-fi shops in the UK, and I do recommend them for listening to very beautiful mixes of rock music and singer-songwriter music. They're exquisite. They are my favourite headphones for listening to those genres. I think the only other headphones that I've listened to, and I've listened to a lot, that I'd happily go to, and between the two, are the Sennheiser HD 660S's. If you wanted to have a look at those as well, I've done a mention of them in my Hi-Fi Man Sundora closed review, and I also mentioned those ones in my overview of my headphone collection. But I've had quite a few headphones coming in to the little room since then and leaving. Now to the SR80s. These are undeniably a beautiful sounding headphone, especially for the £150 UK asking price, and you can sometimes find them second hand for £40, and that is an exceptional performance to value buy. One thing which is undeniable is they do unfortunately suffer from the less well put together cheap materials, unfortunately, which is the same with a lot of the Grado headphones, but particularly with the SR80s and the SR60s, you unfortunately have materials which on first appearance and they feel like a £40 headphone. But when you listen to them, when you experience the music with them, they have a lovely warmth to them, they have an engaging sound, they have fantastic imagery. They do get muddled with complicated music, and they do lack the finite details in the upper register and in the lower register, that level of refineness that the SR325s have. So there you go. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've enjoyed doing it. I've very much enjoyed listening to these headphones, and in fact I'm happy to say I'm keeping these headphones. Unfortunately, those GS1000s do need a cable change, but that's something which I enjoy the process of. So that's it for now. Goodbye.
Well,